Well, hello, everyone. I know you're all feeling kind of dead. It's the end of the day. Hello, everyone. All right. Let me welcome on stage my beautiful React Core Meta team. So you have met them all throughout the day, and I'm sure you have tons of questions. So please post your questions to Slido. I do have Slido right here, so I'm going to be taking your questions towards the end of this. But before we get started, hello everyone. My name is Shruti Kapoor. I used to be a software engineer at Slack. I know. Yeah! And now I quit my job to be a full-time YouTuber. Yeah! Which is way more exciting than people think it is. But today we're going to ask some questions. I represent you, so I have collected some questions that you have posted on Reddit, Twitter, GitHub issues, and on the live stream. But I want you to actively participate by posting your questions there. We unfortunately won't have anybody who will come up here and ask the question, so that is your way to ask the questions. So before we, let's just get in, because I know we only have 40 minutes, so the question that everybody has been thinking today, which is, what happened to your talk, Rick?
I got kicked off stage. There was a little bit of a scheduling issue. But tomorrow I'm going to make up the second part of my talk. So stay tuned. Thank you.
Yeah, I've been really looking forward to your talk, so I can't wait for part 2.
Thank you.
So we'll do like a little warm-up question, which is, of all the features of React 19 that you have seen, which is your favorite feature? And we'll start with you.
This one's a tough one. I think my favorite is use effect event because I wrote the PR. But also it's like also the same feature that I don't like the most. Should I save the answer for a later question, or
let's hear it.
Well, so use effect event is like a new API. It's a little bit tough because we don't want people to abuse it. And I think if you start thinking about where can I start throwing use effect event all across my code base, I think the question you might want to ask first is, do I actually even need an effect here? And then read the docs on you might not need an effect. And only in the very rarest of circumstances where you do need an effect, the docs also do a really good job of describing the use cases where you might need a use effect event. And so the canonical example is where you have, for example, an effect that connects to some WebSocket, like a chat room, and you might want to trigger some sort of event whenever the user connects to a chat room, like show a notification. And so use effect event will sort of let you issue that event from that effect without you having to define or declare that dependency in the dependency array. So it's a kind of a advanced API. So don't use it too much. is the takeaway.
Use effect event is actually one of my favorite features of React 19 as well, because I can imagine a lot of code getting cleaned up. And you're right, use effect gets abused a lot. So I'm worried use effect event would also get abused a lot. But I'm hoping that people will stop doing that ESLint exception to avoid the dependencies.
Yeah, exactly. Definitely use the linter as well, because the new version of the linter will tell you, will give you the appropriate warnings if you're using use effect event incorrectly. So definitely make sure to, if you do have to use effect event, use the linter.
Yeah, use effect event is a weird API, right? It's definitely not, oh, the linter told me I have, I'm missing a dependency or something. Let me just wrap it in a use effect event and move on with my life. It's really understand there's a specific behavior it's meant for, and that's when you should use it. So definitely check out the docs. For me, I guess, I want to say all of them, but partial pre-rendering I think is pretty cool. Just the ability to start work on even ahead of time, right? And then be able to resume that at kind of client rendering time. It's just like a really sophisticated feature that crosses it's just like crosses time in a really interesting way. So that's a cool one.
Yeah, for me, let's see, at the risk of maybe stealing Rick's answer, I'm going to go back to 19.0, and it's the combination of async actions and use optimistic. I think it's a really powerful pattern. It took a while for it to click for me, but as we start integrating it in more and more places, especially in the framework level places, it just becomes really powerful. Really powerful way to do your async coordination, but still have the opt-out for those times you need the instant feedback.
So for me, I'm a DevTools guy, I'm biased, but for me it's the owner stacks that we added in 19.1. Like, if you think of it, like it's probably like for the first time we can actually like reliably capture all the owner stack tree, all the JSX declarations from the root and down to the element. And there was a lot of like technical work done on how it works and which like APIs it's using. It's like part of the optimizations that had to be done to actually reliably use it. So yeah, owner stacks.
I know I've talked a little too much about activity today, but I think performance tracks are really cool. I think it lets you introspect the React scheduler and really visualize like what work is actually important in blocking the UI and what work like is not as important, like updating hidden content. So looking forward to seeing people use it.
Yeah, mine is view transitions. We have animation. How did nobody say this? We have animations in React with the view transition stuff. And I was following along with all the work that Seb was doing on view transitions. And I'm going to write a React Labs blog post to kind of explain everything that it does under the hood. But it's incredible what it does to automatically prevent things from animating that you don't expect to animate. Add nice crossfades when you want to crossfade, or shared elements when you want to do shared element animations. It's really powerful, and it kind of shows off the concurrent rendering and scheduling benefits the most. So I'm really excited about it.
I spend a lot of time thinking about the user in view of React. Developer in view or developer facing in view, and I agree with Rick. The rest of the answers are wrong. For me, it's about like, for the first time, we can put delight as like a first-class citizen in React and have features like shared view transitions that are just incredibly delightful. So all of these other things build up to that and make a lot of that possible. But for me, it's that one. Is Seth actually in the room? No? We'll let him know we were gonna shout out to him.
Yeah, I think view transitions is really cool. It handles a lot of like the complexity of animating things, and it's been one of my favorite features, along with performance tracks, which is really cool to see the deep dive on it. But Seth, I'm gonna put you on the spot, and you dropped a huge news today about React Foundation. So can you tell us a bit more about React Foundations and how features will be developed in the future?
Sure, I mean, like, that's not an easy question, but the basic idea is that, we want to open the table to more people. We've created the foundation, and over the past few years have created a governance system that we've been using internally, thanks to Joe and Matt and a few other folks, Rick and other folks that have worked on that, to develop this staging system and governance system so that we actually have an internal process that we use that will mirror what the foundation will use. But there's a lot TBD. We're bringing all of the players to the tables to determine kind of how that's going to work. But for the first time, we're going to have more of an open door, more of an open table. We're going to involve folks from a sort of board advisory perspective, a technical governance perspective, and a community contributors perspective perspective in a much more official way, such that it's going to be easier to understand the sort of rules of engagement. Today it's very ad hoc, and it's someone came up and asked me in the break earlier, it's like, how do I get involved in the React Foundation? I'm like, go understand React and submit a bunch of PRs until you get noticed, and that's pretty much how it's been for years. But we want to actually have like clearer pathways to that, and there's more details in the blog post on the react.dev site.
Nice. And here's a spicy one. In some open source foundations, the companies contributing the most financially have usually the ones with the loudest voice on the table in foundations team. How do you plan to avoid that with React Foundations?
We have kind of a sliding scale. The basic way it's going to work is that the largest contributor to the foundation actually is Meta, which is not surprising. Considering that it's both putting in 50 people every year as well as the most money to found the foundation. Meta will retain a larger stake in governance for the first 5 years, but it's going to basically, each year we will lose a vote until we are 5 years in, and then we'll have one vote just like everybody else. And so it's going to give us time to continue steering React in the direction that's important for Meta, but also give the community time to start taking over more and more of that so that we find the middle path.
So I know you folks have worked with Meta and Meta's code base a lot on React, especially developing new features, and with Sanity on new compiler things as well. So I'm curious, what insights have you gathered from React 19 early adopters that have been unexpected? And this is a general question for anybody who wants to take it.
I missed the question.
So what insights have you gathered from early adopters of React 19 or 19.2 that have been unexpected?
I wouldn't say it's unexpected, but it's still too hard to use. And the concepts are still so new and rolling it out everywhere. And that's what my talk's about. That's how we're going to get to the next step of making it easier to adopt all these features. They're really powerful and really cool, but I was just talking to somebody in the hallway, and I was explaining action props in components. And they're like, what's that? And it's like, well, it's in the docs, but it's not really well understood yet. And so rolling that out more and getting it more usage will be great.
And we talked a lot about compiler today, so I have questions on compiler for Lauren or Mofei, which is, in what cases is manual optimization still necessary?
I guess I wouldn't think that manual memoization is necessary, but it might be useful in cases. There's generally maybe two use cases. One is if you're observing that your app is really slow because of some really expensive computation, and you go in and maybe open the performance track, and you see like a really big time slice. And if React compiler is not memoizing that as optimally as you want to, you can go in and add a manual memoization, just if it's affecting you. And secondly, we've seen that occasionally, if you're rolling out the compiler on an existing app, sometimes you might have rules of React breakages in your app. So you might expect a certain value to be memoized a specific way previously. And of course, if React compiler changes things by memoizing your apps differently, you might want to just keep your manual memoization and not remove it. But that's really an edge case for if you're rolling out the compiler on very complicated apps. So we've only had to edit meta code a handful of times across hundreds of thousands of components.
Yeah, and to add to that, I think we talk about this in the doc as well, but you absolutely shouldn't feel pressured to go and remove all your manual memoization, because the compiler can just optimize your components anyway, even if you've already used manual memoization. So yeah, there's definitely no rush to delete all of them.
And are there plans to deprecate use memo and use callback in the future in favor of React compiler?
No, I don't think so. Maybe Joe, you want to add more to that?
Yeah, so we don't plan to deprecate them at the moment. So right now, the compiler understands use memo and use callback and kind of uses them to help guide its inference. And so what this does is it gives you kind of an escape hatch. So if you, the idea is, for the most part, you don't have to worry about manual memoization. The compiler just takes care of it for you. If you do find, as Mofei mentioned, like a case where, oh, this component is still running a bit too much, you can go in and add manual memoization, and the compiler will then use that to say, oh, okay, I can kind of use that as part of the heuristics to guide the rest of the compilation. And so you're going to get those memos and then additional memoization, for the rest of the component as well. So that's kind of how we're thinking about it. Is like it's an escape, like a manual control escape hatch with the compiler for edge cases where you might need that. We'll kind of see how that goes, and that's based on feedback from the community that was really helpful. So we'll kind of see how that goes, and then see if we want to deprecate from there. But that's the plan for now.
And have there been any use cases you've noticed with early adopters that have prevented them from using React compiler in production?
One thing we've definitely heard a lot is the fact that the compiler is still a Babel plugin, and we know a lot of the community has moved on to like Rust-based tooling, like SWC. So that's definitely like one of the recurring questions we get is like, when is the compiler going to work like natively in my SWC build pipeline? And for that, I think that the team, we've talked about it a lot. I think our current plan is to, so there's this project at Meta that's called Static Hermes, and it's a project to use Hermes, which is our own JavaScript engine, to pre-compile JavaScript into like native code. And so the idea being that we can, keep the very flexible development process we have in the compiler, which is written in TypeScript, compile and get the benefits of a natively built binary. But that's still a bit, maybe, I'm not sure like how far out that is, but it's something on our radar and something we want to explore. But if that doesn't pan out, then we'll have to think a lot about maybe another attempt at porting the compiler to Rust, and then that can work with SWC. But yeah, definitely though, it's like a question that comes up a lot. Yeah.
Yeah, I would just add, we also are still developing a lot on top of the compiler, adding new features, adding more lints. And so given that we're still developing a lot, it's kind of we're not sure if it's the right time to explore the porting. And so we'll see, yeah.
Oh. I want to change gears a little bit and talk about activity, which is something we announced today. And Rick, maybe this is a question for you, which is, can you talk a little bit about how activity works behind the scenes under the hood?
Yeah, I could talk a lot about it. We use, I don't know how much detail to get into, but when it goes hidden, we wrap it in a display none, so it's removed from the DOM. So visually, you don't see anything. And then anytime that there is a render that flows into the subtree that's wrapped in an activity, or if there's an update within that tree somehow, we schedule it onto a separate queue, and then we continue processing everything outside of the activity. And then when there's idle time left in the CPU when nothing else is being rendered, we go back to that queue that we stashed, and we render the hidden content. And we do that in a very yieldy way so that if there's any user interaction at all while we're doing that background rendering, we stop and we give priority to the visible content. And one big controversial change, potentially controversial, but I think it makes sense, is when an activity goes from visible to hidden, we unmount all of the effects. And the reason for this is, let's say that you have like a video on tab 1 and you have tab 2 and you switch from tab 1 to tab 2. But you want the video to stop playing. So if you're already using an effect to toggle your play and pause, that gives you the expected behavior. It gives you a very close behavior to what you would get if you rendered null for the tab. So it matches the complete unmount behavior by unmounting the effects. So conceptually, the way that you can think about it is that React is unmounting the component, but saving the React state in the React DOM, so that if it does come to become visible again, then we kind of bootstrap it with the saved state.
I really like that when we had the different tabs, you could still see what's on the other tab and it's resumed. I'm curious, like if you have multiple tabs, do you notice a performance problem in there? Have you noticed that if you have tons of different tabs that has activity?
Not if you're using activity. The one downside that you can hit, especially for using like virtualized lists, is memory, because if you still have all of that DOM mounted, you're still going to take up space in the document. We have some plans for that in the future with different modes that would be able to automatically garbage collect and remove DOM nodes for things based on an algorithm like least recently used or things like that. But we didn't want to block shipping activity on shipping like all the modes that we want. We also want a mode for like freezing the app. So the use case there is if you open a modal and the content behind it is still visible, you want to be able to not wrap it in display none, but you still want to deprioritize it. And then you also have to decide whether or not you actually paint the updates to that behind the modal. You probably don't want to, you might not want to do that, because then while the modal's open, you got all the flickering happening behind the modal. So there's a lot of different modes that we can do with activity. That's why it has a mode option instead of a Boolean for hidden or not. And it's just like the start of it. And that's why it's called activity and not just like hidden or off screen, is because it's really a different way to start to segment your app into different activities that you can control with different modes.
Yeah, really, really cool. Like the mode stuff is really cool. I can already imagine a lot of refactor that we would need, something that we were doing manually to kind of do the same effect. I'm really excited for those. Ruslan, you showed performance and debugging today, the performance tracks, which was really cool. I'm curious, we already are using React Profiler. How do you see those two working together? Do you see any difference that the React Profiler is giving you currently, which performance tracks doesn't?
Oh, that's a good one. So I think like React DevTools knows, like in general, knows more about your React compared to like browser DevTools still. And the most kind of naive example I can give is like, I don't know, if you see some suspicious render and you want to see like where exactly on the screen this, like the component was actually rendered, like React DevTools can do it, whereas like performance tracks cannot. Well, maybe in the future. But like with performance tracks, it's like I think like one of the coolest things is that you see the built-in tracks of like your browser on the same timeline with React specific information. Whereas like React Profiler panel has more kind of the information about React runtime, which is not like fully like yet streamed to the performance tracks.
And Jack, maybe this is a question for you. Like, what UI patterns do you feel are best suited for activity and view transitions?
Yeah, for activity, I mean, there's a number of ones we've shown today. Like some of the typical ones are wrapping your tabs in activity. But I do want to point out that doing that doesn't mean you have to wrap every page you can navigate to an activity. You can think of like more creative ways to achieve what you're going for. Maybe you have one tab in particular. We do this a lot with meta apps, which tend to be like very feed heavy, and then you go to other places, but feed's really the core of it, where we really want to keep feed active. And we might do that in other places, but like feed's the priority. So that's sort of the tab usage. Some other ones I've heard about are maybe using it for like almost like a least recently used cache of just whatever the previous page is, assuming that's the most likely for a user to return to. So even the tab thing kind of depends on your use case. Other than that, of course, we have the pre-rendering of places you might go. Mofei showed a bunch of that earlier today. And we're also experimenting with virtualization. Like in typical virtualization, you have some threshold. You have like the viewport of the items on screen. Obviously, those need to be mounted. They're currently visible. And maybe, you know, n plus or minus 2 so that you can scroll. Those are visible as well. And then you might just render null after that, before and after that in a typical virtualization. Something we're experimenting now is just like adding another threshold there where just off screen we can have activity hidden. So it's just much faster to come online. and then beyond, again, maybe to render null. So I think there's a lot of creative usages. I'm excited to see like what frameworks and libraries, existing virtualization libraries, existing frameworks that handle routing and page navigations do with that.
That's a great point that you bring out about frameworks. So follow up on that is, what are some features that you feel today are something that are framework dependent? I know in the past React has pushed for framework first. Today, how do you feel that has changed? Are there still features that are framework dependent in React 19? Or do you think it's something that the developer can use right outside of, right out of the box in React?
Yeah, I wouldn't really describe it as framework-dependent features, but as I'm going to explain in my talk tomorrow, wiring them all up is very difficult. But it's really not the React features necessarily that's difficult. Like doing routing is hard. Doing data fetching is hard. With data fetching, you got to do things like caching and revalidation and all these different pieces that move around. You either use a framework off the shelf or you end up rebuilding your own framework. There's very small amount of use cases, maybe for like a widget on the page where you aren't building your own framework and you're just like rendering to a very small element on the page. But we're just kind of not really recommending frameworks as much as we're telling you like you're going to end up building a framework.
Okay, I'm going to take questions from Slido. I know a few people have submitted questions. And I love this question, which is probably for Lauren or Mofei, which is, am I truly allowed to add React compiler and delete all my use memos and use callbacks?
Are you allowed?
Yes. Am I truly allowed?
No, you're not allowed.
We can't tell you what to do.
We'll arrest you.
Delete all of them right now. You have to. No, that's a joke. I mean, you can delete your use memos and use callbacks. Just test it first to make sure that none of your effects or whatnot are depending on it. As someone, I think Joe and Lauren explained just now, React compiler does preserve your use memos. So if you delete them, your effects might run just slightly differently. So yeah, if you delete them, test it. But good luck.
I think for new code, definitely you probably don't need to use memo and use callback. But yeah, for existing use cases where you have like code that already works, you might want to be a bit more careful about removing use memo. But again, there's no pressure. You can leave them there. But I think definitely for the new code use case, you can just leave them and just really focus on building user features and hopefully not have to worry about memoization. So, yeah.
And just to add more to this, when we first rolled out at Meta, we had kind of a vision where we can delete use memo and use callback from the React APIs. So we chose a rollout strategy that didn't use any information from use memo and use callback. So the compiled code would be the exact same as if you had actually deleted use memo and use callback. And we were pretty successful in rolling out with the strategy. So it should be safe to delete them if you're following the rules of React.
Big if.
Use the linter.
Use the linter, yes. This is a question which I'm sure everybody would have, which is, with the move to React Foundation, what is Meta's relationship with React going to be?
Yeah, I mean, I guess the simplest answer is React's relationship with Meta is going to remain the same. Like, Meta is continuing to invest the same number of internal people and so forth. We are focusing a lot on different things. Like, you've probably seen the recent move to wearable devices and so forth, and a lot of the performance work we've been doing on everything from activity to compiler to whatever has been to enable use cases on super low powered devices, right, that you can wear on your face. So what's good for Meta for all these years has been pretty good for the React community and will continue to be the case. I think that with the move to the foundation, we're actually just expanding the number of people that can sit at the table. We've had an amazing partnership with Amazon and Microsoft and CallStack and Software Mansion and Vercel over the years, even before the foundation was created. But this will give more of a a voice to those companies in terms of the direction that React will go. And so hopefully we end up with sort of the sum of the parts equaling something greater. And that's the hope here.
Yeah, I love that. This question is great. Any plans for a core team world tour?
If anybody wants to pay for that, we are totally down.
Seth, can we get a plane?
Yeah, it depends on who's paying.
The foundation. I thought that's why we did it, so we could get planes.
Where's Matt? Yeah.
So we now have a compiler. We are considering bringing a new opinionated store. At this point, aren't we building Svelte? This is a question, I didn't ask this.
Get them, Joe.
There's compilers and there's compilers. What I mean by that is we don't have a Babel transform. We have a sophisticated compiler that deeply understands your code. And stores, I think like part of what I was trying to get at in my talk is that really the data model is very dependent upon your application, right? So for example, in the draw app, you can select an entity at a time. And there's a lot of different ways you could represent that. And so I actually like experimented and was like, okay, what if I just track selected over here, and then it means I have to do like multiple interactions to read it, and kind of settled on, oh, okay, here's the most efficient way to do selection so that I have the minimal number of updates that are occurring from that, right? So it's really not about like general purpose things. It's about really fine data modeling to think about what are the access patterns, like what are the update patterns, how should I model my data? This is just like, engineering is hard, right? Like data modeling is really, really important. And so, I mean, the question is obviously just, fun and spicy, but like, yeah, it's not as simple as like an automated solution. It's really about like, choose the right data model, and then we're going to kind of build tools to help you use that in React.
And I think that's, that's one of the you asked the question about the relationship with Meta, and I shared last year when we were here that Meta's been an amazing steward. I shared it this year again. One of the things that is really powerful about using React at Meta is that it's used in myriad use cases. We use it for almost all of our internal tools. We use it on Quest, we use it on our calendar, we use it on Facebook, we use it on Instagram, we use it all over the company. And we get to see like all the different ways developers struggle, all of the different ways developers break it, all of the different ways that things can be turned into general practice abstractions that actually work to improve performance. And then we get to see the things that you can never really get into a general purpose abstraction that need to be where people spend their engineering time to get it right. And that's why we build things like the compiler that takes the stuff that we could generalize off your hands and allow you to focus on, correctly data modeling your application so that you're not over-rendering. I mean, the thing is, we want to make it much easier to bring ideas to life, but at the same time, there is still, and probably always will be, the need for engineers who can look at this and say, like, the model is wrong, and we need to optimize the model, right? But let's make the other stuff super easy.
Oh. We can't have a React panel without talking about AI. So, how do you expect, or let's rephrase it, in this era where everybody's building components using AI, what advice would you give to somebody who's just starting out learning about AI and wants to be somebody who wants to, or a senior developer who is currently trying to stay updated and not lose their job in 2 years when all these AI agents will build components for us?
I suspect there'll be a lot of interesting answers from this chairs here. Personally, I think that the best use of AI is really as like a pair, like someone you're pair programming with, and not someone as not a tool to just replace the act of writing code, or worse, outsourcing your thinking. And I think there's a tendency, like, because AI is so exciting, you want to put AI everywhere and be seen as someone who's very, what do you call it, like on the ball, I guess, with AI. That you feel this pressure of like, I gotta increase my productivity, I gotta ship like 100 PRs this week and barely understand what I'm doing and, vibe code my way to a million ARR or whatever. But I think, one of the things that I've personally seen is that although when I use AI, I save some time, writing the code, I actually find myself spending more time reviewing what the AI did and like correcting it. So, like I've tried the thing that a lot of people say, like, you instead of prompting an AI to just build the feature outright, you sort of get it to build a spec for you first, then you review that spec, and then you do that whole thing. Then it's such a time-consuming process. And if you don't really understand what the AI is doing, then I think you're doing yourself a disservice, because it's like the same way that in school you use a calculator or you have an open book exam. The skill of being a developer is really in like the knowledge of using tools. And I think when you just completely outsource that thinking, I think that's like really dangerous. But I don't know what other people will say to that. But yeah, that's my personal thoughts.
Yeah, I agree. I think people continue to be maintainers and like debuggers of apps for a while. I mean, like, you're not going to tell an AI agent to take responsibility for your like website for forever. Like, you're going to ask it to maybe like, help you make architectural decisions or write a component, incrementally improve a function. You might even need to write your own tests or get help writing the tests. But if something goes wrong, I mean, you're the one who has to figure out, like, how do I fix this? How do I use the performance tracks to see what interactions need to be improved?
The best advice I can give you on AI is to not listen to any of my advice on AI. I'm a UI library expert and not an AI expert, and I know very little about what I should tell you to do about it.
I think I've been pretty radicalized by vibe coding. I think, the North Star I shared is I want to see people bring ideas to life. My like North Star is number of ideas brought into the world. The more ideas we have out there for people to be able to, solve problems. I remember when my dad was super sick and he was passing away and he was unable to speak anymore. I like spun up a React app in the same day that would scroll through it would like flash through the most common words in the English language, and all he had to do is hit space to build a sentence as they would come by. And it would go based on the previous words in the sentence. Basically, it was a GPT, it was an LLM, but it would basically just generate sentences very quickly, and he could say what he needed, right? And like, to me, the fact that React empowered me to do that in such a short period of time, like I built it in the same day when he stopped being able to speak, was really powerful. And to me, LLMs and being able to, use the primitives built in React or use the frameworks that have been built around React, work on all the things that everyone here has built, means that the number of ideas that solve major problems in the world, that time is shortened. And so I'm going to say, but whether it's controversial or not, like, I'm super excited that you can generate amazing apps with your voice and with speaking. In terms of like career, I think get really good at code review. I think get really good at design, at how you would design an app. LLMs make really, really bad decisions without enough context, and when apps grow to a certain size, the context window, even at 1 million tokens, is too small, and then there's the context rot that we talked about. So to get really good at making decisions about how apps should be built, go back to the basics, first principles, read architecture patterns books, and start understanding like how to take an app from 0 users up to billions of users. Those are the kinds of things that AI is going to struggle with for a pretty decent amount of time into the future. But those things are coming, and those LLMs are going to get better at it. And so, it's about turning yourself into a 5 or 10x engineer by being able to like work on lots of different things at the same time because that's what AI empowers you to do. Yeah, I think vibe coding and being able to use LLMs is the future, and so you can resist it or not, but I would definitely get on board. The other thing, though, is that for me, writing React is enjoyable. And so there's a piece of me that, like, even when I do vibe code, like, I love getting in there and actually writing the code myself. So, you know, pick your battles, and hopefully, you know, the thing you want to do, you'll end up getting to do.
That's really good advice. Like, AI agents can write your code for you, they can build components for you, but as an engineer, you need to know how to architect your app. So go back to learning about architecture patterns. I think that's a great advice. And to wrap up the panel, I have a final question for you all, which is, you know, React is really popular. It is adopted by a huge number of developers in the world, and there's a big community behind it. You guys are all doing awesome work in making sure that React is amazing, and you build the features that we all need. Now, from you guys, what is something that the community can do to help you succeed at building amazing React?
You could attach code sandboxes to your issues on GitHub.
Please.
I think beyond that, I tried to shout this out earlier in the keynote. Like, we ship features into Canary, especially. Please give us feedback there. We're looking for your usage, for your testing. We use this stuff a lot internally, but we can't hit every pattern. And so, yeah, please use everything in our testing channels.
Yeah, building on that, so libraries can test using, you know, experimental releases or Canary, right? Give us feedback earlier. Rust, the Rust ecosystem has a great setup where when a Rust engineer goes to ship a change to the Rust compiler, they can actually go and kick off a run of all the unit tests for, like, the top, you know, some number of packages in the Rust ecosystem to make sure the compiler is not going to break the ecosystem. We obviously are not there yet, but if libraries could, for example, be, you know, checking against experimental or main even, at the very, you know, at least Canary, that gives us a lot of feedback. So that's, and then of course just all the things Jack mentioned, and file bugs, you know, tell us about issues, right? I think there's you know, the bystander effect, right? You run into an issue, you assume, well, somebody else must have reported it. Like, no, probably not. This is probably a unique thing. Tell us about it. There's so many times where I'll see somebody talking about something on Twitter, and it's like, have you filed an issue? So we know, because we don't always check Twitter. So yeah, just let us know. Yeah.
Create an issue and add Code Sandbox to it. Yep. Got it.
I'd say share more with us and share more positivity and wins and the things that you're building. We see a lot of negative comments. It's usually the loudest, which is fine. But we'd like to see a lot more, like, positivity to balance it out. I think we're all very passionate about this, and we all have a lot invested in working on this technology, and we'd like to be able to see that work pay off.
Yeah, building on Rick's, who stole my answer, be kind. Every single person on this stage and all the people in the blue shirts around the room. In fact, can we get all the blue shirts in the room to stand up? Woo! This is the small, you can sit down now. This is like the smallest percentage of representation of the React team, but, you know, there are 50 people on the React team. And every single one of them is on the React team because they love working for you. They love working for our community. And every time, like, you know, X goes crazy with some, like, negative vitriolic thread about something that starts with S and ends with Ignals or whatever, you know, the people here take it personally because, you know, it's like life's work stuff. And, you know, I think approaching this with, like, an open hearts, open minds, and a philosophy of, like, we are all actually searching for the thing that will replace React. To the last person in the group, we're all looking for, like, the next best thing, right? And so if you approach us with this, like, academic approach of, like, hey, let's find the next fastest thing. Joe keeps asking me all the time, can we go faster, right? Jack keeps asking all the time, can we get, you know, more free lunch? there's an aspect of kindness, I think, that's been lost to some degree in the ecosystem, and I think I'd love to see that come back. And one of the things that I've tried to bring to this conference and to our community is gratitude. Like, we're grateful that every single one of you is here. We're grateful that every single one of you writes code for React. We're grateful that you use React and so forth. And I hope that we can expect from you and anyone you interact with to hold them accountable for being grateful too, because everybody here loves what they do and they just want to make you happy. And so I would say that like gratitude and kindness would be something that would go a long way for all of us.
On that beautiful note, let's give these folks a big round of applause.